Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to Abnormal Voyages. My name is David, and you may not know it just by looking, but we happen to be standing on one of the most famous battle sites in all of American history. We are here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. On these hallowed grounds was fought one of the most crucial battles in the Civil War. Today, we're going to explore not only the battlefield, but the whole story of what took place here. Come tag along.
We're going to a place that you've never heard of before. It's Abnormal Voyages. You're gonna learn something new. We're gonna open new doors. It's Abnormal Voyages.
Before we go too far on the battlefield, I wanted to learn a little bit more about what actually happened here at Gettysburg. Luckily, the perfect place happened to be right nearby, the Gettysburg National Military Park Museum. Inside, we're going to learn all about this historic battle and the soldiers who fought it. We are now in the heart of the museum that's going to tell us all about Gettysburg. Something to remember about the Civil War is that most soldiers fighting in it were just regular citizens who picked up arms and began to fight. They were representing their respective sides. We had the Yankees, who were up north, and then opposite of them, we had the rebels, the Confederates, who represented the South. The country was literally torn in half. Sometimes you would find yourself in battle against somebody from your very own family, brother against brother. Here in Gettysburg, the Southern forces were trying to rally and make their way in for an invasion of Washington, D.C. Let's take a closer look. This map is a great example of which way the forces went to end up in Gettysburg. The Confederacy was coming down through Pennsylvania to get over to Washington, and the Union forces were on their way to stop them. So they went this way, and they decided right here at Gettysburg, where a lot of major roads all intersected, this was going to be the best place to make their stand, to hold off the Confederacy and keep them from coming in to Washington. The Battle of Gettysburg began on July 1st, 1863, early in the morning. Some of the Union scouts happened to spot the first of the Confederate troops as they marched towards Gettysburg. Those scouts fired off a shot, and the Battle of Gettysburg had officially begun. Something incredible about this museum is how many artifacts they have on display. It just astounds me that something so old and so used still exists for us to see it today. Looking at these flags, you can tell they definitely got their use out of them, a lot of wear and tear, but they're still here, still giving us that little peek into history so that we get a great idea of what it actually was like back in the 1800s. A few hours after that first shot, we have a major skirmish at McPherson's Ridge. By nightfall, there's about 3,000 dead soldiers between both sides and about 13,000 that have been wounded. The Confederates are feeling pretty good and have superior numbers at this point, but the Union soldiers do have the high ground, and that evening they really dig in and prepare themselves for more fighting the next day. The battle is now in full force, and the small town of Gettysburg will never be the same again. This beautiful cannon is an example of the types of artillery they were using. But it's very important to remember that this wasn't a battlefield beforehand, of course. This was just a regular place in Pennsylvania that people were living their lives. To really drive that home, right over here we see an example of boards that came from a local farmhouse. All places where artillery fire blasted through them and ruined the house. Just like those rafter boards, there are plenty of everyday items that still exist now with bullet holes and cracks and pictures that show just how unprepared this little town was for the Civil War to come knocking. We now move on to day 2 of the fight. The general of the Confederate forces, Robert E. Lee, was unsure of how big the forces of the Union Army were. He ended up splitting his troops to cover both ends of the battlefield. This did allow them to corner down and pin several of the battalions from the Union forces. So at first, this seemed like a great idea, and Robert E. Lee was doing pretty well. In response, the Union Army scrambled to grab strategic places that they could, using the terrain to their advantage. One such place was Little Round Top, where they were able to set up on the top of the hill that gave them a great vantage point against the approaching Confederate soldiers. By early evening of that second day, both sides had suffered heavy losses, and the body count was really starting to pile up. Looking back on it, it almost feels like they were playing a game of chess. Every time one side happened to make a capture, the other side responded in kind. Nobody was really gaining a lot of ground, just heavy losses. The Confederates are determined to gain some kind of ground though, so they drag the fighting out all night long. Soon it's so dark they can only find each other by the musket flashes going off. Eventually, the fighting ends a little before midnight, and the Confederates have got a slight foothold, but really still not that much. Night fighting was very dangerous and difficult. It made it almost impossible to communicate across lines.
Using different methods of communication has always been a staple of warfare. However, back in the Civil War, they didn't have things like radios and the internet or anything like that to send messages. So, the way they were able to effectively get messages across battlefields was by using flags. They created a system where, kind of like Morse code, the way you moved the flag could be strung together to read messages. This tells us what they were like. So if we were going to spell, let's say, my name, D would be position 1 3 times. So 1, 1, 1, that would be the D. We'd go to A. So they'd pause for a moment, then do the next letter, which would be 2 1s as we see. All the way to V, which was a more complicated letter, but it would be the number 2, so that's the 2 formation, and then followed by 3 1s. We get around to I, and this one was just a simple 2 by itself, so you'll see it go down, and that was the I, and then of course we would end back at the D with 3 more 1s. And then to show that this was the end of a word, they would go to position 3, which was only used for the endings, and it was just like that. And if that was the entire message, you would rapidly do 3 3s in a row. It did take a little bit to get messages out, but in cases like Gettysburg, messages like this saved lives.
By the third day of fighting, Robert E. Lee was done with it. He was ready to win this fight. He decided to take the bulk of his army and rush them straight up Cemetery Ridge, where the bulk of the Union Army was located. He figured with their overpowering numbers, they could decisively defeat the Union here and win the day. The Union forces looked out over where they were stationed and saw this huge number of Confederate soldiers marching right at them. These forces were being led by General George Pickett, and this became known as Pickett's Charge and was a huge strategic mistake. Not only did Robert E. Lee not account for just how fortified the Union forces were, but marching all the Confederates up through the field made them very easy targets. A few of them did make it all the way up there to engage in hand-to-hand fighting, but a vast majority of the Confederates that participated in Pickett's charge were killed before they even reached the Union forces.
This is the cyclorama. It is a presentation of an incredible piece of art. It goes 360 around you and makes you feel like you are right in the middle of Pickett's charge.
This breathtaking painting shows exactly what Pickett's charge was. All the Union soldiers marching straight up towards the Union with almost no cover and no way to defend themselves from the artillery and bullets
that came down into them. Not only did this turn the tide of the Battle of Gettysburg, but some say it turned the entire Civil War. With the bulk of their forces defeated, the Confederates were forced to retreat, and the Union Army had officially won the Battle of Gettysburg. The Civil War itself would continue for about another 2 years, but the fighting that had happened here in this little town of Gettysburg had changed everything and would never be forgotten.
With over 50,000 casualties from the Union and Confederacy both, Gettysburg will go down as the bloodiest battle in the entire Civil War. Now that we know a little bit more about what happened, let's get back out to the battlefield and see some of these locations in person.
If you've been here, you understand what they mean when they say this is hallowed ground. Just knowing what happened here definitely gives it some very intense vibes and a lot of energy of all the history that transpired in this ground.
On July 3rd, Robert E. Lee would insist that the soldiers in this area from the Confederacy march up right against the Union at where he believed the Union was weakest. Now, the Union did have the high ground, of course, so about 15,000 Confederate soldiers, all out on these flat lands here, were ordered to march up against the high grounds where the Union soldiers were waiting. Of course, coming from a strategic standpoint, this was an awful idea. The Union soldiers up here unloaded all of their artillery, their cannons, their guns, right down into the Confederates, who were basically sitting ducks at this point. The Confederates were decimated here, and this led into what would soon happen over that way, Pickett's Charge.
These flatlands here are where the Confederates began their marching straight towards the Union forces and the town of Gettysburg. For many of them, this would be their last battle.
Here is where the heart of the Battle of Gettysburg happened. This is where the famous Pickett's Charge took place.
Though peaceful today, this is the ground where the bloodiest battle of the Civil War happened. It's important that we preserve places like this so that we can remember our history, even the tragic moments. Throughout Gettysburg, you do find a lot of monuments, such as this one here, that are set up in different places, each commemorating different battalions, different skirmishes, different people who were involved in the fighting. Regardless of which side they were on, everyone here was fighting for something that they believed in. They were fighting for those they loved and the country that they wanted to build. Even if they disagreed on a lot of things, I think if the Confederate and Union forces who fought in this battle could still be around today, one thing they would all agree on is that they would never want to see the United States fall to a civil war like this ever again. Reading about something is very different from actually getting to see it in person. So when you're here, you can see the sites of all the major skirmishes that happened in the Battle of Gettysburg. They've left them just like they were back in the 1800s. One in particular that I really wanted to visit was Little Round Top.
Here at Little Round Top, some of the most famous fighting happened during the Battle of Gettysburg. Over 5,000 men fought in all this land around the hill, and there were over 1,000 casualties before it was over.
Considering how many passed away here, it doesn't surprise me that they claim Little Round Top in particular is still haunted by the souls of the soldiers that battled here. If they are still here, though it may be a little bittersweet, at least they have a stunning view. Like I mentioned before, I'm very glad that they have all these monuments and memories of what happened here. All the lives that were sacrificed, at the end of the day, hopefully will stand as reason to us to never forget what happened and never to repeat the mistakes of our past.
I can think of nowhere more appropriate to end our day in Gettysburg than here at the Gettysburg National Cemetery, where Abraham Lincoln would give his very famous Gettysburg Address. He spoke on bringing the country together and that we could have peace and move forward as one so that all of us could have a brighter future. And I think that's something that still rings true to this very day. Well, that's all the time we have for today, adventurers. If you enjoyed this, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to see all of our future voyages, and make sure you comment below where you would like to see us go next. All of it really supports us, and we definitely appreciate it. My name is David, and this has been Abnormal Voyages. Thanks for tagging along. We'll see you next time.